and welcome to Doing Business in the Isle of Man, special webcast in which over the next 30 minutes we'll be looking at the opportunities and the challenges of doing business and investing in the Isle of Man. Now we'd like your questions, you can submit them on the site, as I'm sure you've discovered, and I can put them over the next 30 minutes to our two guests today. We have with me Courtenay Heading, who's a businessman and an advisor to the Isle of Man government. Welcome, Courtenay. And also with me here on my right, Chris Cummings, who's Chief Executive of TheCityUK lobby group for financial services. Welcome to both of you. Let me start with you, if I may, Courtenay. What is the business climate like on the Isle of Man at the moment?
I think it's taking note of what's happening globally. It's slightly battered, but has still got a fair degree of optimism. I think one thing we haven't yet fully done is articulated what the Isle of Man stands for. It's better known as the TT than necessarily the Isle of Man and where it is. Some of my American friends think it's in the British Virgin Islands, so I need to get that perception sorted. But I think generally we're saying as a nimble country we've got to accept that change is coming at us and develop relationships, particularly strongly into the east as well. So not just City of London, but also look at where the new markets are. You
mentioned nimble there. Just give us a picture of what you mean by that.
Writing our own laws, we've done that for 1,000 years, but we need to do, I think, more of them in new niche areas, recognising that some of the diversity in the economy we've got needs to go further. We need to, I think, attract more high niche manufacturing. The government, anytime I've brought anyone over from abroad, will see them, but they want to know they're real. And I think, even though we've had elections a year ago, Chief Minister's saying we now need to execute. We need to really do things faster, and I'm with him on that.
So, Chris, how does all this sound to you? From the point of view of investors, this attractive?
Well, the Isle of Man's had a very good reputation historically and continues to receive plaudits. The latest OECD report showed that it had a good tax regime, and certainly during the financial crisis that didn't just affect the whole of the UK but more globally, the Isle of Man was a good supporter to the City of London and continued to provide liquidity. So from an investment point of view, I think the Isle of Man has a lot to offer, and certainly the close relationship between financial and professional services throughout the UK and on the island is particularly important. It's a good and strong relationship.
Well, tell us a bit more about that relationship. It is close. Is it easy? Is it a very easy relationship to keep going?
From a business point of view, yes. Sometimes the media perception can get in the way a little bit, and there are some issues that we always have to strive to overcome. But actually, from an investor's point of view and from a business point of view, we always want to work very closely with colleagues on the Isle of Man. Actually, we always try and tell the story of the fact that these are good symbiotic relationships. It works very well both ways. There's often a view that the City of London draws in everything towards it, whether it's the best skilled people or the most money. Actually, the city is very good from what I like to think of as a centripetal impact. We're very good at spreading jobs and growth around the rest of the country too. So getting the balance right, always something to be mindful of, but actually historically and today it works very well.
Okay, Courtenay, Chris, let's pause for just a moment because we've been speaking to Mark Field, who's a Member of Parliament for the cities of London and Westminster, and we asked him for his views on the relationship which we've been talking about between the UK and the Isle of Man.
Clearly, the Isle of Man has become a very successful place. Probably one of the challenges it faces is trying to ensure that success continues. And that means obviously attracting high caliber people who can work in the Isle of Man in a sustainable way. And one thing that struck me is whenever I've been out to the Isle of Man, and as I have on a number of occasions over the last 2 or 3 years, is just what an attractive proposition it is for many people with a city background, people who might have worked at some of the very best law firms, accountancy firms, or indeed even banks and fund management outfits here in the City of London, who look at the Isle of Man and say it's a fantastic mix. You've got a great quality of life, a tremendous place to bring up children, whilst having no sacrifice in the quality of work that they have been used to doing at the highest international levels. And it's an amazing success story when you think, as I say, with roughly 100,000 people living on the island, to have the breadth of quite technical, specialist, globally transferable skills that the Isle of Man has. I think it's a great tribute, and long may it continue.
Mark Fields there talking about the relationship between the UK and the Isle of Man. Now, Courtenay, as an entrepreneur, if I wanted to start up, how easy would it be for me to start a business in the Isle of Man?
Not as easy as it was. I think after 2008 everything changed, liquidity's dried up, and some of the private high net worth people are not investing as much. However, in a relatively closed community or united community, you can get access to high net worth individuals, you can get an idea past them, and a lot of them are what I call the wealthy board. certainly playing too much golf, most of the people I know, but they have great business skills and they can shortcut and save you a heck of a lot of time and a lot of mistakes. Some of them will want to join in the company I was involved with as a founder director, Bladon Jets. We managed to get some great on-island talent. One individual had been sitting watching daytime television for 4 months and now he's gainfully employed. So I think that's one thing the island needs to do better. But it at least can get a foothold of intellectual property stored on the island and then accelerated as a headquarters location. I think it's excellent for that. And there are other companies that demonstrate that quite well that are global.
Well, on a specific basis, we just had a question in from Glenn who says, we always make the association of prime business locations with big business, but are there opportunities for small and medium enterprises? And if so, what are they?
Yeah, I think small and medium, if you look at some of the niche stuff, I'll diversify slightly into goods that we export around the world, which are Lockton lamb and Manx queeners. Most people don't know them, but in their niche, they're highly valued and they're a premium product. So you can get niche items that are designated a place of origin from the Isle of Man. You can get niches such as our space and shipping industries, and they can start in the Isle of Man and put our message out around the world. So as long as they're niche and high value, that's the area we need to, I think, concentrate on.
Now, Chris, I mean, one of the big issues for businesses starting up, of course, is getting government help, grants, advice, all this kind of thing. From what you know of the way the Isle of Man operates, the kind of people you're involved with, would they be attracted by the kind of government help they might get there?
I think that there's always a place for government help. From an external investor, someone looking to start a business, the key motivations, the key drivers really are, what's the taxation environment like? Is it predictable? Is it known, transparent? There's nothing better than being boring when it comes to tax policy. It's a much underrated asset. The second thing we look for, particularly in financial or professional services, is in terms of the regulatory environment. Are you dealing with a regulator who you can work with? And again, a known quantity. But after that, it's something like the skills base. And actually, is there a deep pool of talent available? So just picking up on some of the things that Courtenay was saying, actually, are there opportunities to go in there and hire a workforce already in existence? Or what we also see is where there's a willingness from government and education bodies to work with employers in order to make sure that there are match-fit graduates, people coming through the education system. And actually, it's those, and particularly the skills aspects, that are worth even more than some of the government grants available in many parts of the world today. So the message I always give is this is a globally competitive world, and the things that make the difference really are the nuanced decisions. But I keep coming back to skills as the deciding factor.
All right, Courtney, let me pick up on those 2 points really. One, first of all, what sort of government help is there, grants, advice, etc. And secondly, is there a good, as we say, well-educated, skilled workforce out there to use?
On the grant side, I think I'm always cautious of grants. There are certainly capital goods grants, 40%, but you need to make sure they don't distort behaviours and they don't just attract the wrong sort of business. So I think it's great, but they're applied fairly vigorously. I know some of the people who do that. So grants are there, and they will also, for special workers, if they've come off the island but are needed on the island, they will support you there. So it is supportive on the grant system, aid system. In terms of the quality of people, one of the problems we have, in a way, is we have 2% unemployment, which is a fraction of many places around the world. So we have a small gene pool, 85,000 people, and we're starting to grow our own talent, particularly in apprenticeships where some of the aerospace companies, some of the aerospace cluster people have a lot of grey-haired people who are brilliant and have been doing it for 30 years. They're coming up to retirement, and there is a skills gap that is starting to be bridged by apprenticeships where people go into schools, encourage engineering. We can't all get by with media studies. We have to make stuff, have to export it, have to get rich doing that, and that's how you can support, one of the policies of the Isle of Man is support the vulnerable. If you don't export stuff digitally or high-value goods, you'll have a problem. So growing the skills and apprenticeships, I think, is key, and I think hopefully engineering is becoming sexy again.
Okay, Courtney, thanks very much indeed. Just a reminder that you're watching a special webcast, Doing Business in the Isle of Man, and my guests with me, Courtenay Heading, who's a businessman and advisor to the Isle of Man government, and also Chris Cummings, who's Chief Executive of the TheCityUK, a lobby group for financial services. And I think financial services is pretty much what we're going to come on to next, because I've got a question here from Derek Lang, who says, what are the incentives, including tax, for doing business on the Isle of Man? What are the offshore implications of doing business there? Courtney?
I think on the fund side, I'm not an expert, but I think high regulatory standards are the first thing. If you don't have a good reputation, you have nothing. If you look at whether it's been the OECD, mentioned earlier by Chris, IMF, G20, all of them have said things like we're a model jurisdiction, we come on the white list for transparency, and compliance, those two words are absolutely key. I know the Chief Minister has views that not all countries are playing on a level playing field. All we can do is do what we're doing and look forward and put in the legislation that attracts those companies. We don't always like it. It can be burdensome. It can be costly. Sometimes the guys don't smile as much as we like. But we do have a closed door and keep the barrier high, because if we lose the reputation, then we'll lose business. It's as simple as that.
Now, Chris, clearly it's a factor for investors, isn't it? The tax implications of where you're going to be doing business and investing. How do they regard the Isle of Man?
Oh, I think positively, and with good reason. There are various reports that have been published that showcase the approach that the Isle of Man has taken to further its reputation. And really that's what it comes down for me, because actually without reputation, regardless of how good your marketing is, it simply falls on deaf ears. So having the right regulatory approach, particularly in today's world, in this post-financial crisis world, is seen to be so important. The days when countries would promote a light touch regime are long gone, and I'm pleased about that, because the public needs to have the reassurance that actually the financial services industry has learnt the lessons of the financial crisis and won't make those mistakes again. So actually having a strong and robust, internationally recognised regulatory architecture, good supervision, absolutely essential, because that gives people the confidence to invest, whether that's starting a new business or making sure that they're investing in a particular location. It does come down to reputation.
Well, financial services reputation clearly is an issue, as we know. But financial services, to many people, do seem to dominate in the Isle of Man, or have historically. We've had a question in from Paul Lake, who says, is the Isle of Man economy too reliant on the financial sector?
No, I don't think it is now. I think it's about a third of gross domestic product. So it's changed a lot in 30 years. There was a diversification strategy implemented about 1980, and that included engineering, space, shipping, all the other areas you've heard about, film, and realising that things like software, those sorts of goods, those sorts of areas should start to be supported and encouraged. We now have 1,000 top software people, gaming people who are based on the Isle of Man. Financial services are still an important part. We need to innovate, which we are. There is a lot of impetus got behind that, but I think it's not now the dominant area that it was. And I think that recognises that of the international business centres, small jurisdictions, we are the most diversified by far.
So I was going to say, 30 years ago, I think there was a plan put forward by the government to diversify, and it's coming through on the plan. Basically.
It's 100% is coming through. It needs to go further, but it's coming through. If you look back 30 years ago, I think it was agriculture, fishing and tourism, and now it's manufacturing, finance and probably software. So a complete change in 30 years, and we need new skills faster to continue those niches, that diversification.
And I suppose we shouldn't forget again the European dimension of all this, Chris, because the Eurozone banking union plans, I mean, what sort of implications are they going to have for the Isle of Man, do you think?
There's no doubt that the creation of the European banking union will fundamentally affect financial services across the whole of Europe. We will move to a single supervisor, and that's going to create some interesting challenges for the UK government and politicians across the whole of the EU as to how they respond to that, both recognising the democratic legitimacy questions that will be posed. So some big chunky questions there for us to get into. For financial services, actually what we're looking for is to make sure that as we move to this new reality, that what we end up with is an open and competitive Europe. Because if we're going to attract those Chinese businesses you were mentioning a little while ago, it's fundamentally important that Europe remains a competitive place to do business. So the changes shouldn't get in the way of protecting the customer, but making sure we've got economic growth and job creation across the whole of Europe. Just on that rebalancing question, because yes, I am from financial services, what always appeals to me is the talk of growing many tall poppies rather than trying to shrink any. So I applaud the strategy that's been put forward of wanting to grow in areas such as ICT, in high-tech manufacturing. That seems to me the right approach to look to build on the strengths that already exist. Because what I see around the world is other countries saying, well, if Europe wants less financial services, if you want fewer people employed in that, that's fine, because we're looking to grow our financial services industry. So we'll take the tax take, we'll take the jobs, we'll take the prosperity that comes from all of that. And that's at the detriment of other parts of Europe. So actually, I think what we need now is more successful industries, both in services and in high-tech manufacturing, and worrying a little less about penalising other parts of the industry. So I think we need to maintain our global position.
Well, talking about the global position, another interesting issue is, we mentioned the Asian markets, also, of course, the Middle East. Do you think the Isle of Man is doing enough to court those kind of markets from your perspective?
Yeah, and it's here, I think, actually, that the combination of Isle of Man and City of London has a really important message to sell. We've done a great deal of work with colleagues in the City of London Corporation and others to help London become established as the renminbi trading centre for the Western world, and with some success. What we're trying to do is lock in that position so that we're encouraging not only more Chinese tourists but Chinese business people to come to the UK. And in order to make that strategy a success, what we're going to need to do is work with Isle of Man and all parts of the UK to get the offer right, because China's quite a big country and they're going to look to want to deal with many trading partners across the whole of Europe. And if we can secure the renminbi trading centre here, then what that actually means is creating jobs and growth around the rest of the country. So I think it's potentially very good news.
Now, we've been talking throughout this discussion really as if everything is rosy, and of course over the past 4 years the international climate economically has not been, particularly in Europe and America. How has that been affecting the island?
I think everyone feels they're being crushed between icebergs. You know, there's a big world going on out there. There's the quality of life that everyone prizes on the Isle of Man. You know, you get to a certain age and work-life balance starts to really matter. And suddenly you can't just work the same. You've got to work harder for less money in some cases. And the climate is still optimistic, providing we define our offering better and providing we get out and make those relationships count. I think those two things are my biggest concern. We have to get really strong relationships and tell the world, yes, it's about the Isle of Man TT. That's our opening gambit in many places still, whether people like motorbikes or not, it's very well known. From that economic activity can flow. I came to the Isle of Man for 15 years for the TT, fell in love and sort of stayed. So I think there's many other people do the same thing.
Okay, Courtenay, thank you. Just a reminder that you're watching a special webcast called Doing Business in the Isle of Man. I've got two special guests with me today. They are Courtenay Heading, who is a businessman and an advisor to the Isle of Man government, and also Chris Cummings, who is with TheCityUK Lobby Group for Financial Services. Well, let's put this question as well, Chris. Is the Isle of Man, this comes in from Chris Taylor, is the Isle of Man an attractive near-shoring location for businesses in the City of London in terms of the skills available?
I could have wanted a better question, actually. We've just completed a large-scale study looking at the last 6 years' business decisions of where major companies decide to site their locations. And actually what we found is that, yes, it's true, companies want to come to the City of London because of the natural attributes. But what we're finding is that companies want to look at offshoring, but actually the real winner over the last 6 years has been nearshoring, where people want to take advantage of transport connections, of language, of culture, of that pool of talent we talked about a few moments ago, of understanding the tax and regulatory system. And what we're finding is that companies are nearshoring their operations, to the point actually where the nearshore operations are becoming more globally competitive perhaps than some of the central locations. So we're expecting, as we look over the course of the next 6 years, to see nearshoring really take off. So we're now looking at what policies should we be talking to governments, Isle of Man and the UK generally, about what are the policies that they should be putting in place to build on the success we're seeing.
Okay, Courtenay, I mean, we mentioned skills there. We mentioned it earlier in this discussion, but it is a key point. Now, you're an advisor, but you're also a businessman. Do you find in the Isle of Man that you have the right skills base for your needs?
I think engineering, there is enough skill, but you need to know people who can plug you into it. It's not always signposted. But there is, I've not seen an area in the world that has so much hidden talent, and it's almost a Manx way to slightly hide and be discreet, and you need to tease that out. But we've had no major problems, partly because we're more headquartered on the Isle of Man. We put a factory in the UK near to Jaguar Land Rover, and that product will be sold into India. But the localisation on the Isle of Man didn't require us to have a huge workforce there.
It's interesting you talked about it being all quiet or modest or about its situation. And I suppose that is a point. The Isle of Man is a small island in a big and competitive economy. What are the problems of trying to get your voice heard in the world?
There are problems because we're smaller. There's a lot of noise out there, and we've got to make sure it's the signal that people hear. I think perceptions persist in terms of what the Isle of Man is. What I'm amazed about is every person that's been to the Isle of Man, whether they're Dutch or from Dubai or from America, they come and every single person leaves with something that surprises them.
And what advice would you give to the Isle of Man on that basis? I mean, you know, you're used to getting the UK's voice heard. I mean, what more could the Isle of Man do?
I think I'll always seek to build good and better relationships with various governments, government departments, work closely with ministers, but also build relationships around the northwest, move into the northeast. Actually, by building alliances, local and more international, there is a magnifying effect. The funny thing is as well, when people run businesses, when you're starting or running a business, I mean, yes, you always look for the hard factors. You know, it's the tax rate, the regulatory regime. But we mustn't undersell the soft value of life factors as well in business decisions, because there are lots of parts of the world where, yes, it's easy to find lower tax rates or more easy regulatory systems, but having something to do at the weekend, having a nice thing to do in the evening, ability to go shopping, things, whether it's art galleries or sporting activities, count for a huge amount when deciding to move a company or to base a new location somewhere. What we also found is where through some research we did, people tend to justify in the head, but then rationalise in the heart. So actually, bringing people to the island, showing them around, leading business delegations, it proves the relevance. And actually, those are the things that can clinch a business deal. So don't underestimate the pint in the local pub that you were telling me about earlier. Those things make a difference.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're coming towards the end of the webcast now about doing business in the Isle of Man, and I can't let either of you go without getting from you what you think are the challenges, the big challenges coming up for business in the near and indeed medium-term future. Courtenay, in the Isle of Man, what are the challenges?
I think it's getting a bigger degree of paranoia than we've had. I think we've had 30 years of unbroken economic growth. We have low crime rate. Everyone's pretty happy. But internationally, those business models are changing ever quicker. If you look at the technology in your home, the life cycle is shrinking. So both product and service around the world, it's ever faster destruction of your business model. I'm hoping, although I'm going to come over to the Isle of Man, that we get the paranoia. We don't look back and hope it's 1980. It's not. And that's my biggest challenge, that the world is moving so fast. We've certainly started on that journey, but I think there's a long way to go. I think we've got some centres of excellence on the island.
Chris, what do you see as the big challenges coming forward?
I think we have an emerging narrative about Europe which says that we are an ageing population, locked into 10 years of low growth, we're over-regulated, we're overtaxed, and we have politicians who won't take the brave decisions. So if you're a US company, invest in Asia. If you're a Latin American company, deal with the US. And we find ourselves locked out of the emerging south-to-south trade corridors where other parts of the world just get on and ignore Europe because we seem to be less than relative. So the challenge is always to outperform that narrative, to find ways to showcase ourselves, to say, actually, no, we are not only relevant, but actually the place to come to access a market of 500 million people. So I think that's the opportunity, and we do need to remember we're a great trading nation and be out there selling and promoting ourselves.
Outperforming the narrative, perhaps that's a good theme on which to end this special webcast called Doing Business in the Isle of Man. My thanks to you for sending in your questions, and my thanks also to Courtenay Heading and to Chris Cummings, who've been talking to us over the past 30 minutes. Bye-bye.